History is full of powerful families, but few cast a shadow as long and wide as the Habsburgs. These folks started out pretty humble, ruling a tiny chunk of land in what is now Switzerland. Yet over centuries, they cooked up plans so wild, so mind-bendingly ambitious, they'd make your jaw drop. Their schemes weren't just about grabbing a new kingdom or two. They were about painting the world map in their family colors, forging empires that stretched across oceans, and fundamentally reshaping the entire European landscape. They were the ultimate power players, dreaming truly colossal dreams. Prepare yourself for the unbelievable, the daring, and the sometimes tragic sagas of history's most audacious family. Number 8. Archduke Ferdinand Maximilian's Mexican Adventure. The year was 1864, and the air in Trieste, a beautiful port city on the Adriatic, thrummed with a nervous excitement. Archduke Ferdinand Maximilian, younger brother of Emperor Franz Joseph I of Austria, stood on the deck of the Austrian frigate SMS Novara. He was about to embark on the most extraordinary and ultimately tragic adventure of his life. This wasn't a holiday. This was an ambition on a scale most people could barely fathom. He was leaving behind the comforts and complexities of European royalty to become Emperor of Mexico. Yes, you read that right. Emperor of Mexico. Maximilian, a man of refined tastes, a lover of botany and the sea, was perhaps not your typical conquering monarch. He had previously served as commander of the Austrian Navy, a role he relished, but he always felt a bit overshadowed by his imperial brother. He yearned for a grander purpose, a stage where he could truly shine. So when an offer came from afar, an offer promising a crown and a new empire, it resonated deeply with his romantic adventure spirit. This wasn't an organic plea from the Mexican people. It was a proposition engineered by powerful European interests, primarily France, under the ambitious Emperor Napoleon III. France had intervened in Mexico, ostensibly to collect debts, but Napoleon III harbored grand designs of establishing a new friendly empire in the Americas that would serve French interests and perhaps even counterbalance the growing power of the United States. They needed a European figurehead, someone with royal lineage and a certain aura, and Maximilian fit the bill perfectly. His wife, the Belgian princess, Charlotte, daughter of King Leopold I, was even more determined than he was. She was sharp, politically astute, and saw this as a monumental opportunity not just for Maximilian but for the entire Habsburg dynasty to extend its reach into a truly global empire. For centuries, the Habsburgs had focused on Europe through marriages, wars, and inheritances. This plan was different. This was a jump across the Atlantic, a bold claim on a nation thousands of miles away, a reassertion of European imperial power in a hemisphere increasingly dominated by the Monroe Doctrine's warning against such intervention. It was a gamble of epic proportions, a plan so ambitious it bordered on fantasy. The journey itself was filled with pomp and circumstance. Maximilian had, with some reluctance and a significant amount of political wrangling, accepted the offer of the Mexican crown, but only after demanding guarantees that the Mexican people genuinely wanted him. A rigged plebiscite was arranged, showing overwhelming support for his emperorship. Ignoring the clear signs of deep division within Mexico and the strong Republican resistance led by Benito Juárez, Maximilian convinced himself this was his destiny. He packed his extensive library, his botanical specimens, and a retinue of European courtiers ready to transform Mexico into a modern, enlightened empire. Historians often point to his naive belief in the will of the people, as presented by the French, a clear sign he underestimated the complex political realities awaiting him. Upon arrival in Veracruz, Mexico, the reception was far from the triumphant welcome he had envisioned. The port city was hostile, the roads were rough, and the journey to Mexico City was fraught with difficulties. Nevertheless, Maximilian pressed on, determined to establish his new realm. He chose Chapultepec Castle, perched on a hill overlooking Mexico City as his imperial residence. It was a beautiful location, and he immediately set about transforming it, landscaping the gardens and adding European touches, all while attempting to govern a country torn by civil war and foreign intervention. His immediate challenge was simple: establishing legitimate rule in a nation that had only recently thrown off Spanish colonial power and was deeply suspicious of any new foreign overlord. Maximilian, to his credit, was not without good intentions. He was genuinely interested in the welfare of the Mexican people. He supported indigenous rights, established agricultural reforms, abolished debt peonage, and even offered an amnesty to Republican forces. He attempted to build hospitals, schools, and railways, ambitious projects aimed at modernizing the nation. These were not the actions of a brutal conqueror. They were the actions of a ruler who genuinely believed he could bring stability and progress. Contemporary dispatches from his court reveal his deep fascination with Mexican culture and his sincere efforts to learn about its people. However, his efforts were constantly undermined by a multitude of factors. First and foremost was the ongoing Republican resistance led by Benito Juárez, a fiercely patriotic indigenous leader who rejected any foreign-imposed rule. Juárez and his forces were determined to restore the Mexican Republic, and they had the backing of many ordinary Mexicans. Secondly, Maximilian's financial situation was dire. The Mexican treasury was empty, and the French financial support, which had been a key part of the deal, proved insufficient and inconsistent. He was constantly borrowing, plunging the young empire deeper into debt. Records from the Mexican treasury during this period paint a stark picture of overwhelming financial strain. Thirdly, and perhaps most fatally, was the shifting, girdling landscape in Europe and North America. The American Civil War, which had distracted the United States and prevented it from enforcing the Monroe Doctrine against France's intervention, ended in 1865. A unified and powerful United States now openly supported Juárez and demanded the withdrawal of French troops. With a massive, experienced army, the U.S. began supplying the Mexican Republicans with arms and materiel, effectively sealing Maximilian's fate. Napoleon III, facing domestic pressures and the looming threat of Prussia's growing power in Europe, could no longer afford to maintain a costly expedition in Mexico. In 1866, he began withdrawing French troops, leaving Maximilian and his loyal Mexican conservative forces isolated and vulnerable. Charlotte, realizing the gravity of their situation, embarked on a desperate, frantic journey to Europe to plead for help from Napoleon III. And even the Pope. She was met with polite refusals. Her pleas grew more desperate. Her mental state deteriorated. Under the immense pressure, and tragically, she suffered a complete mental breakdown, spending the rest of her life in seclusion. Her journey underscored the immense isolation Maximilian now faced. Maximilian, despite advice to abdicate and return to Europe, refused. He felt a sense of duty to the conservatives who had supported him, and perhaps a stubborn pride. He was captured by Juárez's forces in Querétaro in May 1867. A military court sentenced him to death. Despite pleas for clemency from European heads of state, including his own brother, Emperor Franz Joseph, Juárez was resolute. He knew that to truly establish Mexico's sovereignty and deter future foreign interventions, a clear message had to be sent. On June 19, 1867, Maximilian, along with two of his loyal Mexican generals, Miramon and Mejia, faced a firing squad on the Hill of the Bells outside Querétaro. His last words, according to numerous historical accounts, were, "I forgive everyone, and I ask everyone to forgive me. May my blood, which is about to be shed, flow for the good of the country. Long live independence." His death marked the end of an ambitious, misguided, and ultimately tragic attempt by the Habsburgs to extend their dynastic reach across the globe and establish an empire in the New World. It was a dramatic close to one of the most improbable and ambitious expansion plans ever conceived by a European royal house. Number 7. Joseph II's Bavarian Blueprint. It was the late 18th century, and Emperor Joseph II was a man in a hurry. He wasn't like his mother, the formidable Maria Theresa, who had fought tooth and nail to preserve the Habsburg inheritance. Joseph was a reformer, a lightning rod of radical ideas, driven by an almost obsessive desire to make his vast, sprawling empire more efficient, more rational, and more powerful. He looked at the map of his domains, stretched across Central Europe, and saw a problem. They were fragmented, with pockets of land far from the core, and awkward borders that invited conflict. His grand plan wasn't about conquering distant lands. It was about consolidating, streamlining, and creating a compact, powerful Habsburg state at the heart of Germany. His ultimate goal was the Bavarian blueprint. Bavaria, a wealthy and strategically important electorate, lay right on the Habsburgs' doorstep bordering Austria. Joseph coveted it deeply. He saw it as the natural extension of his Austrian lands, offering rich resources, a dense population, and a much more defensible border than his far-flung possessions in the Austrian Netherlands, which are present-day Belgium. They were geographically isolated from the main Habsburg territories, expensive to defend and perpetually restive under Austrian rule. With a strong desire for local autonomy, they were a strategic liability, a drain on resources, and a point of contention with neighboring powers, particularly France. So Joseph, in his characteristic, audacious style, cooked up a truly ingenious, almost Machiavellian scheme. He proposed a massive territorial swap. He would relinquish the Austrian Netherlands to the Duke of Zweibrücken, a distant relative and the heir apparent to Bavaria. In exchange, the Habsburgs would annex Bavaria. This wasn't just a simple trade. It was a grand strategic maneuver, designed to fundamentally alter the balance of power in Germany and consolidate Habsburg dominance. Joseph believed this exchange would provide a more coherent, defensible, and prosperous territorial base for his empire. Diplomats in Vienna, archives from the period show Joseph's intense personal involvement in drafting these complex proposals. The opportunity arose in 1777 when the Bavarian electoral line appeared to be on the verge of extinction. The childless elector, Max Joseph III, was ailing. Joseph II, ever the opportunist, immediately swung into action. He was a master of backroom deals, and he quickly struck an agreement with the next in line, Karl Theodor, the Elector Palatine. Karl Theodor, who had no particular love for Bavaria and preferred his existing Rhenish territories, was receptive to the idea of trading his claim to Bavaria for the Austrian Netherlands. This would give him a new kingdom, the Kingdom of Burgundy, close to his existing domains, and a royal title which he greatly desired. The deal was almost too neat, too perfect for Joseph. Joseph's personal secretary, Count Philip von Cobenzl, later remarked on the emperor's unyielding will in pushing this deal forward. The specifics were worked out in secret, shrouded in diplomatic secrecy to prevent immediate opposition from other European powers. Joseph envisioned a seamless transition, a bloodless acquisition that would strengthen his empire without firing a shot. He was so confident that upon Max Joseph III's death in December 1777, Austrian troops, without much fanfare, marched into parts of Bavaria, claiming them as Habsburg territory. This preemptive move was a bold statement of intent signaling that Joseph was serious about his Bavarian blueprint. However, the plan, though brilliant in its conception, ran into a formidable obstacle. Frederick the Great of Prussia, Frederick, by then an aging but still sharp-witted strategic genius, saw Joseph's Bavarian ambition as a direct threat to the balance of power in the Holy Roman Empire. Prussia had long vied with Austria for dominance in Germany, and a consolidated, powerful Habsburg-Bavarian state would tilt the scales decisively in Austria's favor. Frederick, who had once famously said he would die fighting for German liberties, viewed this as a clear attack on the traditional structure of the empire and a dangerous escalation of Habsburg power. He wasn't about to let Joseph walk all over the German states. Frederick rallied opposition. He found an unlikely ally in the Duke of Zweibrücken, the very man who was supposed to receive the Austrian Netherlands in the swap. The Duke, advised by his crafty chancellor, decided he preferred Bavaria after all, especially once Frederick promised him protection. Frederick also brought Saxony into the fold, another German state wary of Habsburg overreach. The diplomatic maneuvering was intense. A chess match played out across the capitals of Europe. Messages flew between Berlin, Vienna, Paris, and St. Petersburg. The result was the War of the Bavarian Succession in 1778 to 1779, famously nicknamed the Potato War because the armies spent more time foraging for food in the barren Bohemian borderlands than actually fighting pitched battles. It was a war of maneuver, attrition, and supply lines rather than decisive engagements. Joseph, despite his immense military reforms and his personal desire for glory, found himself bogged down in a stalemate. The financial cost was enormous, and the political opposition from Prussia was unyielding. Contemporary military reports show both sides struggling with logistics and disease more than direct combat. Ultimately, Joseph was forced to back down. The Treaty of Teschen, brokered by Russia and France in 1779, brought an end to the conflict. The Habsburgs gained only a tiny sliver of Bavarian territory. The Envirtal, a region directly bordering Upper Austria, the Grand Bavarian Blueprint, the sweeping territorial swap that would have radically reshaped the Habsburg Empire and German politics, was scrapped. The Austrian Netherlands remained in Habsburg hands, a distant and troublesome possession for another decade, until revolutionary wars swept them away for Joseph. It was a bitter defeat. It showed the limits of even an enlightened autocrat's power when faced with determined opposition from a rival great power. It revealed that even the most rationally conceived expansion plans could be thwarted by the complex web of European alliances and the enduring power dynamics within the Holy Roman Empire. The Bavarian Blueprint, while never fully realized, remains a testament to Joseph II's relentless ambition to forge a modern, powerful, and consolidated Habsburg state at the heart of Europe. It was a vision of expansion not through traditional conquest, but through clever, audacious, and ultimately frustrated diplomatic exchange. Number 6. Maria Theresa's Silesian Redemption. The year 1740 was supposed to be a time of quiet transition for the Habsburg monarchy. Emperor Charles VI had died, and his eldest daughter Maria Theresa, a spirited and intelligent woman of 23, was preparing to ascend the throne. For years, her father had tirelessly worked to secure the Pragmatic Sanction, a document that guaranteed his daughter's right to inherit all Habsburg lands undivided. He had cajoled, bribed, and promised concessions to almost every European power to get them to sign off on this agreement, believing he had secured his daughter's future. He thought he had left her a solid if sprawling inheritance. He was terribly wrong. No sooner had Charles VI breathed his last than the wolves descended. The ink on the Pragmatic Sanction was barely dry when Frederick II, the newly crowned King of Prussia, saw his chance. Frederick was young, ambitious, and utterly ruthless. He had a formidable army built by his austere father, and a burning desire to elevate Prussia from a minor German state to a major European power. His target, Silesia, a wealthy, industrialized, and strategically vital province belonging to the Habsburgs, located directly on Prussia's southern border. Frederick's invasion of Silesia in December 1740, barely 2 months after Maria Theresa's accession, was an act of breathtaking audacity. He didn't even bother with a proper declaration of war. He simply marched his troops in claiming some ancient, dubious dynastic right that nobody else recognized. This wasn't just a grab for land, it was a direct challenge to Maria Theresa's legitimacy. A calculated act designed to test her resolve, and if successful, unravel the entire Habsburg inheritance. For Maria Theresa, this was personal. It was an insult, a betrayal, and a direct threat to everything her family had built. Official letters from her court reveal her initial shock, quickly followed by a fierce determination. Her position seemed hopeless. Most European powers, despite their promises, saw an opportunity to carve up the ailing Habsburg monarchy. Bavaria claimed Bohemia. France, always eager to weaken Austria, supported Bavaria. Saxony had its own claims. Maria Theresa was a young woman, untested, pregnant with her first child, and facing a virtually bankrupted treasury. The situation was grim. Many predicted the end of the Habsburgs as a major power. But Maria Theresa was no ordinary monarch. She possessed an indomitable will, an iron resolve, and a profound sense of duty to her family and her people. She refused to yield. When her advisors urged her to negotiate, to cede Silesia, she famously retorted, "I have placed my trust in God alone, and my firm resolution is to lose my last drop of blood, rather than give up a Cinderic." She meant it. She rallied her Hungarian nobility, delivering a passionate speech to the Diet in Pressburg, modern Bratislava. Holding her infant son Joseph aloft, the Hungarian magnates, moved by her plea, famously shouted, "Vitam et sanguinem pro nostra rege," "Our lives and blood for our king." They still considered her king for tradition's sake. This moment, chronicled by numerous contemporary observers, became a symbol of her early reign. The ensuing War of the Austrian Succession, which lasted from 1740 to 1748, was a brutal continent-wide conflict. Maria Theresa fought on multiple fronts against a formidable coalition. She lost battles, she lost territory, but she never lost her spirit. Her ambition wasn't just to survive. It was to recover what was hers, specifically Silesia, which Frederick had so brazenly stolen. Silesia became the symbol of her struggle, the ultimate test of her power and prestige. She worked tirelessly, reforming her army, improving finances, and cultivating new alliances. She proved to be a shrewd diplomat and a determined military strategist, often overriding the advice of her more cautious generals. Historians note her remarkable ability to learn and adapt under pressure. Despite her valiant efforts, the first phase of the war ended with the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle in 1748. Maria Theresa, exhausted but unbowed, was forced to formally cede Silesia to Prussia. It was a bitter pill to swallow. She had successfully defended the bulk of her inheritance, but the loss of Silesia gnawed at her. She famously said, "I have never ceased to shed tears over the loss of Silesia." For Maria Theresa, this was not the end of the story. It was merely a temporary pause. Her ambition to reclaim Silesia remained undimmed, a burning ember waiting for its moment to reignite. That moment came less than 8 years later. Maria Theresa, driven by her unwavering desire for Silesian redemption, orchestrated a diplomatic revolution that fundamentally reshaped European alliances. She abandoned Austria's traditional alliance with Great Britain and forged a new, astonishing partnership with her old enemy, France. This was a complete reversal of centuries of Habsburg-Bourbon rivalry, a move that stunned every court in Europe. She also secured an alliance with Russia. Her goal was clear: isolate Prussia and reclaim Silesia. This shift, known as the Diplomatic Revolution of 1756, was a testament to her political genius and her relentless focus on her primary objective. The result was the 7 Years' War, 1756 to 1763, a truly global conflict that saw Austria, France, Russia, Sweden, and Saxony arrayed against Prussia and Great Britain. For Maria Theresa, the war was again primarily about Silesia. Her armies fought valiantly, inflicting heavy defeats on Frederick, and even briefly occupying Berlin. The fighting was fierce, devastating large parts of Central Europe. Accounts from the battlefield paint a picture of immense suffering and destruction. Maria Theresa poured every resource into the fight, driven by her singular focus. Yet, despite her powerful coalition, the war ultimately ended in a stalemate. Frederick, a military genius, managed to fend off his numerous enemies through brilliant tactics and sheer perseverance. The withdrawal of Russia from the war after the death of Empress Elizabeth in 1762 and the financial exhaustion of all combatants eventually led to peace. The Treaty of Habsburg in 1763 once again confirmed Prussia's possession of Silesia. Maria Theresa never reclaimed Silesia. It remained Prussian, but her ambitious lifelong struggle to win it back, her refusal to accept defeat, and her willingness to overturn centuries of diplomatic tradition to achieve her goal, marked her as one of the most formidable and ambitious monarchs in European history. Her Silesian redemption plan, though ultimately unsuccessful in its primary aim, showcased her incredible resilience, her strategic brilliance, and her profound commitment to the territorial integrity and prestige of the Habsburg monarchy. She may not have regained the lost province, but she secured her dynasty's future and cemented her place as a true empress. Number 5. Leopold I's Ottoman expulsion. The year is 1683. For centuries, the Ottoman Empire had been a formidable and terrifying neighbor to the Habsburgs, constantly pushing westward, clashing over Hungary, and at times threatening the very heart of the Holy Roman Empire. Vienna, the Habsburg capital, had faced numerous sieges before, but this time the Ottoman threat was more immense, more terrifying than ever. Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha led a colossal army, numbering perhaps 150,000 men, a truly staggering force for the age. Their objective was clear: capture Vienna, the gateway to Central Europe, and from there, push further into the continent. Emperor Leopold I, a deeply pious and cautious ruler, found himself facing the greatest crisis of his reign. He had initially fled Vienna, seeking safety and gathering allies, a move criticized by some, but one that arguably saved him from capture and allowed him to direct the defense. The city was besieged, its walls pounded by Ottoman cannons, its defenders dwindling. Hope seemed to be fading for the Habsburgs and for Christendom itself. Accounts from within Vienna describe desperate prayers, dwindling supplies, and a pervasive sense of dread. However, Leopold I was not without ambition, though it was often masked by his cautious demeanor. He was a devout Catholic and saw himself as the defender of Christendom against the Ottoman infidel. His long-term vision was not just to push back the Ottomans, but to expel them entirely from the territories they had occupied in Hungary for over 150 years. This wasn't merely about defending, it was about reclaiming, expanding, and securing the Habsburg eastern flank once and for all. It was an audacious plan, one that would require an unprecedented military effort and sustained diplomatic unity. The immediate crisis was relieved by one of the most decisive battles in European history, the Battle of Vienna on September 12, 1683. A combined force of Polish, Austrian, and German troops, led by the brilliant Polish king Jan III Sobieski, launched a massive cavalry charge that shattered the Ottoman siege lines. The relief of Vienna was a monumental victory, a turning point that shifted the balance of power in Central Europe decisively against the Ottomans. Leopold I, returning to a liberated Vienna, understood the magnitude of this moment. He wasn't just safe, he was now in a position to strike. This victory ignited Leopold's grand ambition, the systematic expulsion of the Ottomans from Hungary and beyond. This wasn't going to be a quick war. It was to be a long, grinding struggle, known as the Great Turkish War, 1683 to 1699. It required sustained effort, innovative military leadership, and a commitment of resources on a scale previously unimaginable for the Habsburgs. Leopold's primary military commander was the extraordinarily talented Prince Eugene of Savoy, a man of slight stature but immense strategic genius. Eugene, rejected by Louis XIV of France, found his true calling in Habsburg service. He understood Leopold's vision and became the driving force behind its military execution. Together they forged an effective, well-organized imperial army, bolstered by contributions from other German states, and eventually a revived Venetian Republic and Russia. Detailed military records from the time show the logistical complexities of supplying such a vast army. The campaign was relentless. The Habsburg forces, led by Eugene and other capable generals like Charles of Lorraine, systematically pushed eastward. In 1686, they recaptured Buda, the historic capital of Hungary, after a devastating siege, ending 145 years of Ottoman occupation. This was a hugely symbolic victory, restoring a key piece of the old Hungarian kingdom to Christian rule. The war continued with battles fought across Hungary, Transylvania, Serbia, and even into Bosnia. Key victories included the Battle of Mohacs in 1687, avenging the catastrophic defeat of 1526, and the stunning Battle of Zenta in 1697, where Prince Eugene utterly annihilated a large Ottoman army, marking a decisive turning point in the war. Accounts from the Zenta battlefield describe the complete rout of the Ottoman forces, a testament to Eugene's tactical brilliance. Leopold's ambition wasn't just military. It was also political and religious. As the Ottomans were driven back, the Habsburgs began to reassert their authority over the newly liberated territories. This meant not just military occupation, but also administrative reorganization, resettlement of populations, and a significant effort to re-Catholiциze regions that had been under Ottoman or Protestant influence for generations. Leopold saw this as a divine mission, solidifying his role as protector of Catholic Europe and expanding the reach of the true faith. His court pronouncements often emphasized the religious dimension of the conflict. The war dragged on for 16 long years, demanding immense sacrifices in men and resources, but the strategic gains were immense. By the time the Treaty of Karlowitz was signed in 1699, the Ottoman Empire had suffered a crushing defeat. The Habsburgs gained nearly all of Hungary, including Transylvania, Croatia, and Slavonia. For the first time in centuries, the Ottoman threat was not just contained, it was rolled back. The Habsburg Empire had expanded significantly to the east, becoming the dominant power in Central and Southeast Europe. The Ottoman expulsion plan was a resounding success. It transformed the Habsburg monarchy from a besieged defender into an assertive expansionist power. It laid the foundation for the massive multi-ethnic empire that would endure for another 2 centuries. It solidified the Habsburg claim to the crown of St. Stephen, effectively integrating Hungary into the dynastic lands, albeit with significant autonomy. This ambitious vision, born out of crisis and executed with brilliant military leadership, fundamentally reshaped the map of Europe and secured the Habsburgs' place as a preeminent great power, extending their influence deep into former Ottoman territories. Number 4. Philip II's Iberian Union. It was 1580, and King Philip II of Spain, the most powerful monarch in Europe, stood on the precipice of an astonishing expansion. He was already ruler of a vast empire, inheriting not only the Spanish kingdoms of Castile and Aragon, with their rich American colonies, but also the Netherlands, Naples, Sicily, and a host of other territories. His father, Charles V, had once held an even more enormous, but geographically dispersed dominion. Philip, a meticulous, cautious, and intensely devout man, preferred to consolidate power, to bring order and unity to his vast possessions. His ambition was not just to maintain his inherited empire, but to expand it even further. And his focus turned to his immediate neighbor, Portugal. The Portuguese throne had suddenly become vacant. King Henry, the elderly and childless monarch, had died without a direct heir. This sparked a succession crisis that immediately caught Philip's attention. He had a strong dynastic claim through his mother, Empress Isabella, who was a Portuguese princess. But merely having a claim wasn't enough for Philip. He needed to assert it, militarily if necessary, and integrate Portugal and its colossal global empire into his own. This wasn't just a simple annexation. It was a plan to create a truly unified Iberian power. controlling virtually all of Western Europe's access to the Atlantic and a vast global network of trade and colonies. It was an ambition born of dynastic right, strategic necessity, and the desire for unparalleled power. Portugal was no small prize. It was a maritime superpower with an empire stretching from Brazil in the Americas to Angola, and Mozambique in Africa, to Goa in India, Macau in China, and Nagasaki in Japan. Its trade routes were immensely lucrative, its navy formidable, and its colonial infrastructure vast. To add Portugal and its empire to the Spanish domains would create a combined global dominion of unprecedented scale, an Iberian Union that would truly rule the waves and dominate world trade. Records from the Escorial archives show Philip's intense study of maps and trade routes during this period, meticulously planning his next move. Philip moved with characteristic deliberation and efficiency. He first engaged in intense diplomatic maneuvering, attempting to sway Portuguese nobility and clergy to his side. He made promises of maintaining Portuguese laws, customs, and administrative structures, hoping to win over the powerful factions who feared absorption into Spain. However, several rival claimants emerged, and a strong nationalist sentiment existed among the Portuguese, who valued their independence. One particular claimant, the prior of Credo, Dom Antonio, gained popular support and proclaimed himself king, appealing to Portuguese national pride. This popular resistance meant Philip could not achieve his goal peacefully. He had to use force. He entrusted the military expedition to his most experienced and ruthless general, the Duke of Alba, a man infamous for his brutal suppression of the rebellion in the Netherlands. Alba, despite his age, proved to be as effective as ever. In the summer of 1580, a large Spanish army supported by a fleet marched into Portugal. The invasion was swift and decisive. The Battle of Alcantara, fought just outside Lisbon in August 1580, was the key engagement. Alba's veteran Spanish forces decisively defeated the Portuguese defenders, who were largely made up of hastily organized militias and mercenaries under the command of Dom Antonio. Contemporary military accounts highlight the discipline and superiority of the Spanish tercios following the victory. Alba quickly occupied. Philip II himself arrived in Portugal in December 1580 to formally confirm his new rule. He was crowned King of Portugal in 1581 at the Cortes of Tomar, where he formally established the Iberian Union. He largely kept his promises. Portugal retained its own laws, currency, government institutions, and its vast colonial empire was administered separately, albeit under the ultimate authority of the Spanish monarch. The Portuguese colonial administration continued to manage its far-flung territories, ensuring a smoother transition and minimizing resistance. This shrewd approach was key to the longevity of the Union. The Iberian Union was a monumental achievement for Philip II, a capstone on his vast empire. It brought together two of the world's most powerful maritime empires under a single crown. For the next 60 years, from 1580 to 1640, the two crowns were united in what was known as the Habsburg Union, or the dual monarchy. This union meant shared resources, shared naval power, and a combined global reach that was truly unparalleled. For example, Spanish silver from the Americas now flowed into Portuguese trade networks, and Portuguese access to Asian markets was enhanced by Spanish protection. Historical trade logs from Seville and Lisbon show the immense volume of goods moving through this combined imperial system. This expansion had profound golding implications. It consolidated Habsburg power on the Iberian Peninsula. Denying it to France or England, it put immense pressure on England, especially as the combined Spanish and Portuguese navies became an even more formidable force, seen most famously in the context of the Spanish Armada. Though the Armada itself was a failure, it also meant that Spain was now directly involved in the defense of Portuguese overseas territories, leading to conflicts with the Dutch and English in Asia and the Americas as they sought to chip away at the Iberian monopolies. The Iberian Union was a masterstroke of dynastic ambition. achieved through a combination of legitimate claim, shrewd diplomacy, and decisive military force. It wasn't without its challenges. Portuguese nationalism simmered beneath the surface, eventually leading to a successful revolt in 1640. But for 6 decades, Philip II's ambitious plan created a truly global dominant superpower, an expansion that cemented the Spanish Habsburgs' place, a testament to the sheer scale of their imperial vision. Number 3. Ferdinand II's Holy Roman Empire domination. The early 17th century was a powder keg in the Holy Roman Empire. The uneasy peace between Catholics and Protestants, established by the Peace of Augsburg decades earlier, was fraying. Tensions were high, fueled by religious zeal, dynastic rivalries, and a thirst for power. Into this volatile mix stepped Ferdinand II, a staunchly devout Catholic Habsburg, elected Holy Roman Emperor in 1619. His ambition wasn't merely to rule the empire, it was to fundamentally reshape it, to centralize power in his hands, to re-Catholicize its vast territories, and to establish a unified, powerful Habsburg dominion across Central Europe. This was a plan of breathtaking scale, and it sparked the most destructive conflict in European history, the 30 Years' War. Ferdinand had been educated by Jesuits and was deeply committed to the Counter-Reformation. He saw it as his sacred duty to restore Catholicism to its former glory and to eradicate heresy. This religious fervor was intertwined with his political ambition to strengthen imperial authority. For too long, the Holy Roman Empire had been a loose collection of hundreds of independent states, princes, and free cities, all jealously guarding their autonomy. Ferdinand wanted to turn this fragmented entity into a cohesive, powerful monarchy, with the emperor at its unquestioned head, effectively a Habsburg state dominating Germany. Personal letters from his early reign reveal his unwavering conviction in his divine mission. The spark that ignited this colossal conflict came in Bohemia, a Habsburg possession with a largely Protestant population. In 1618, Protestant nobles, angered by Ferdinand's restrictions on their religious freedoms, famously threw 2 imperial representatives out of a window in Prague Castle. The defenestration of Prague led to open rebellion. The Bohemian Protestants deposed Ferdinand as their king and offered the crown to Frederick V, the Elector Palatine, a prominent Calvinist prince. Ferdinand's response was immediate and resolute. This wasn't just a regional rebellion. It was a direct challenge to his authority as King of Bohemia and his legitimacy as Holy Roman Emperor. He mobilized his forces, relying heavily on the Catholic League, an alliance of German Catholic states, led by Maximilian, the First of Bavaria. Their combined armies crushed the Bohemian rebels at the Battle of White Mountain in 1620. This victory was pivotal. It allowed Ferdinand to impose his will with brutal efficiency. He executed leading Protestant nobles, confiscated vast estates, and began a systematic re-Catholicization of Bohemia, forcing Protestants to convert or flee. This was the first major step in his ambitious plan for religious and political unification. Records from the Bohemian Land Registry show the massive transfer of property from Protestant to Catholic hands, but Ferdinand's ambition didn't stop there. He wasn't content with just restoring order in Bohemia. He saw this as an opportunity to assert imperial authority throughout the entire Holy Roman Empire. His focus turned to defeating the remaining Protestant princes and reclaiming church lands that had been secularized during the Reformation. To achieve this, he hired Albrecht von Wallenstein, a brilliant and ruthless mercenary general, who raised a massive imperial army independent of state funds, living off the land and spreading terror wherever it went. Wallenstein's army became a symbol of Ferdinand's growing power and his relentless will. By the mid-1620s, Ferdinand's forces, combined with the Catholic League, were sweeping across Germany. Protestant armies were defeated and their lands occupied. In 1629, Ferdinand issued the Edict of Restitution, an extraordinarily ambitious and provocative decree. It demanded the return of all church properties secularized since 1552, effectively rolling back decades of Protestant gains and seizing vast wealth and land for the Catholic Church. And This was the clearest manifestation of his plan to recatholicize and centralize the empire. It was a radical measure unsettling to Catholic and Protestant princes alike, as it challenged established legal rights and property holdings. Historians note the Edict of Restitution as the high watermark of Ferdinand's imperial ambition. At this point, Ferdinand II seemed on the verge of achieving his monumental goal. Imperial and Catholic League forces dominated Germany. Protestantism seemed crushed. The Habsburg Emperor was poised to become the most powerful ruler in Europe, ruling a unified Catholic and centralized Holy Roman Empire. This was a direct challenge to the balance of power, alarming every other major European state, particularly France and Sweden, who feared a Habsburg hegemon. This fear spurred direct foreign intervention. In 1630, King Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden, a brilliant military commander and devout Protestant, landed in Germany, determined to save Protestantism and curb Habsburg power. He brought a highly disciplined and innovative army funded by France. His intervention turned the tide of the war as he inflicted stunning defeats on imperial forces, shaking Ferdinand's confidence and forcing him to rely even more heavily on Wallenstein, whom he had temporarily dismissed. Swedish military reports from this period described their rapid, devastating advances. The war dragged on for another 2 decades, spiraling into a brutal, destructive conflict that ravaged Germany, causing widespread famine, disease, and demographic collapse. It involved virtually every major European power, each with its own motives for intervention, but all fundamentally aiming to either support or thwart Ferdinand's grand vision of a centralized Catholic empire. While Ferdinand never wavered in his commitment, the sheer scale of the opposition and the devastating cost of the war gradually eroded his ability to impose his will. Entirely, Ferdinand II died. The dream of a unified, recatholicized empire under Habsburg dominance ultimately remained unfulfilled. The Peace of Westphalia in 1648, which finally ended the 30 Years' War, formalized the religious divisions within the empire and confirmed the autonomy of its constituent states, effectively crippling the emperor's power and ensuring a fragmented Germany for centuries. While the Habsburgs remained emperors, their ambition for a centralized empire was irrevocably thwarted. Ferdinand II's plan for Holy Roman Empire domination was perhaps the most ambitious internal expansion and consolidation scheme ever attempted by a Habsburg. It failed to achieve its ultimate objectives, but its legacy was immense, reshaping the political and religious landscape of Europe and laying bare the profound power of ideological conviction when coupled with boundless ambition. Number 2. Maximilian I's marriage master plan. In the late 15th and early 16th centuries, while other rulers waged costly wars and shed rivers of blood to expand their territories, Emperor Maximilian I, often called the Last Knight, was playing a different game entirely. His ambition wasn't just to conquer through force of arms. It was to weave a vast web of dynastic alliances through strategic marriages, creating an empire so expansive it would dwarf any existing power. His master plan was famously encapsulated in the Habsburg motto, "Let others wage war, you, happy Austria, marry. For what Mars will bestows, on others Venus. Love, or in this case, marriage, grants to you." This wasn't about love, of course, it was about power, inheritance, and a calculated long-term vision of global expansion. Maximilian was a visionary, a skilled diplomat, and a tireless promoter of his family's interests. He understood that while military might could win battles, strategic marriages could win entire kingdoms. Peacefully and perpetually, he looked beyond the immediate borders of his Austrian lands and saw opportunities stretching across Europe and even hinting at new worlds. His genius lay in identifying key dynastic partners and meticulously orchestrating the unions of his children and grandchildren to ensure the Habsburg future. Records from the imperial court show Maximilian's meticulous attention to genealogical charts and succession lines. His first major triumph and the foundation of his master plan was his own marriage in 1477 to Mary of Burgundy, the sole heiress of Charles the Bold. Burgundy was an immensely rich and powerful duchy, encompassing the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and parts of modern-day France, with prosperous cities like Ghent, Bruges, and Antwerp. This marriage achieved, through both diplomacy and a swift military response to French attempts to seize the Burgundian inheritance, brought these wealthy territories into the Habsburg fold. It immediately transformed the Habsburgs from powerful regional lords into major European players with direct access to the lucrative Atlantic trade routes and vast financial reach for dynastic expansion. The United Kingdoms of Castile and Aragon, forged by Ferdinand and Isabella, were rapidly becoming a global power. Thanks to Columbus's voyages and the colonization of the New World, Maximilian understood that if he could link his family to this burgeoning empire, the Habsburgs would become truly unparalleled. So he meticulously arranged a double marriage, a truly audacious diplomatic coup, in 1496. His son, Philip the Handsome, married Joanna of Castile, daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella, and Philip's sister, Margaret of Austria, married John, the Spanish heir apparent. The goal was simple: ensure a Habsburg connection to the Spanish throne. Fortune smiled on Maximilian's audacious plan. The Spanish heir John died shortly after his marriage to Margaret, as did his sister Isabella and her infant son. This left Joanna, Maximilian's daughter-in-law, as the sole heiress to the vast Spanish domains. When Philip and Joanna's son Charles was born in 1500, Maximilian knew his master plan was coming to fruition. He famously declared that the new baby would rule a realm on which the sun never sets. This single stroke of dynastic genius laid the groundwork for the future Emperor Charles V, who would inherit an empire of staggering proportions. The Austrian Habsburg lands, the Burgundian Netherlands, the Spanish kingdoms, Naples, Sicily, and the vast, burgeoning colonial empires in the Americas. Maximilian's foresight and meticulous planning created a personal union of territories. Unute. Empire without the direct cost of large-scale warfare, relying instead on strategic nuptials and the vagaries of royal mortality. Contemporary chroniclers often marveled at the lucky marriages of the Habsburgs, not fully understanding the strategic mind behind them. Maximilian also tried to extend his influence further east. He arranged for his grandchildren, Archduke Ferdinand and Archduchess Anne, to marry the children of King Vladislaus II of Bohemia and Hungary, Anna Jagiellon and Louis II Jagiellon. This so-called Vienna double wedding of 1515 aimed to secure the crowns of Bohemia and Hungary for the Habsburgs through a similar line of inheritance. Again, fate intervened in the Habsburgs' favor. King Louis II died young and childless at the Battle of Mohacs in 1526, fighting the Ottoman Turks. This opened the way for Ferdinand, Maximilian's grandson, to be elected King of Bohemia and Hungary, thus bringing these crucial Central European kingdoms under permanent Habsburg rule. Diplomatic correspondence from the time indicates the immense significance attached to these particular marriage negotiations. Maximilian's marriage master plan was not without its costs and challenges. It required constant diplomatic effort, significant financial outlays for dowries and ceremonies, and endless negotiation. It also meant that the vast territories accumulated through these unions were often geographically disparate, culturally diverse, and challenging to govern, as later Habsburg rulers would discover. But the sheer scale of the territorial gains achieved with relatively little direct military conquest was unprecedented. By the time Maximilian I died in 1519, his grandson, Charles V, stood poised to inherit an empire of truly global dimensions. An empire that spanned continents and cultures, built not primarily on the battlefield, but on the marriage bed. Maximilian's audacious, patient, and incredibly successful cemented the Habsburgs' position as the preeminent family in Europe, demonstrating an ambition that revolutionized the very concept of imperial growth and influence. It was a plan that literally changed the map of the world. Number 1. Charles V's Global Gambit. It was 1519, and the world was changing at an astonishing pace. In the midst of this whirlwind, a young man, barely 19 years old, found himself inheriting a dizzying array of titles and territories that stretched across the globe. Charles V, a grandson of Maximilian I and Ferdinand and Isabella, was not just King of Spain, Naples, Sicily, and the Netherlands. He was also the Holy Roman Emperor, Archduke of Austria, and ruler of vast, rapidly expanding empires in the Americas. His ambition was not merely to administer these diverse lands, but to forge them into a cohesive, unified, and truly universal monarchy, a Christian empire that would dominate Europe and the New World, bringing peace and order under his imperial crown. This was Charles V's Global Gambit, the most breathtakingly ambitious Habsburg expansion plan ever conceived. Charles inherited a domain of unprecedented scale, a patchwork quilt of languages, cultures, and legal systems. From the gold mines of Mexico and Peru to the wool factories of Flanders, from the battlefields of Italy to the forests of Bohemia, his writ ran. His contemporaries often described him as a ruler on whose empire the sun never set. His vision was not simply to hold on to these lands, but to make them work together, to unify them under a single overarching political and religious authority. He saw himself as the last great medieval emperor, destined to lead Christendom against its enemies and usher in a new era of universal peace and piety. His personal diary entries from his early reign reveal a deep sense of destiny and a heavy burden of responsibility. His challenge was immense. His empire was geographically fragmented with France, his perennial rival directly in the middle. His Italian possessions were coveted by both France and the Pope. The Ottoman Empire, under the formidable Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, was a constant threat, pushing into Hungary and menacing Austria. And within his own Holy Roman Empire, a seismic religious upheaval, the Protestant Reformation, was tearing apart the fabric of unity led by Martin Luther. Charles faced enemies on every front, external and internal, all threatening to derail his grand plan. Despite these colossal obstacles, Charles pursued his ambition with relentless energy. He spent his reign tirelessly, crisscrossing his vast domains. A restless emperor attempting to bind his disparate territories together, he waged 4 major wars against France, battling over control of Italy, Burgundy, and the strategic balance of power. In Europe, these conflicts, particularly the Italian wars, were brutal and protracted. He sought to crush French power and secure a direct land bridge between his Spanish and Burgundian possessions. The Battle of Pavia in 1525, where his forces captured King Francis I of France, was a stunning victory that seemed to bring his universal monarchy closer to reality. Diplomatic cables from the period reveal the panic in European courts at this perceived Habsburg dominance. Simultaneously, Charles engaged in a desperate existential struggle against the Ottoman Empire. Suleiman the Magnificent's armies besieged Vienna in 1529, a direct threat to the Habsburg heartlands. Charles, though not personally present, mobilized his forces and rallied Christian Europe against the common enemy. While Vienna held the fight against the Ottomans, continued in Hungary and the Mediterranean for decades, consuming vast resources. Charles saw this as a crusade, a defense of Christendom against the infidel, aligning perfectly with his vision of a universal Christian empire. Naval records show the immense cost of maintaining fleets to counter Ottoman incursions in the Mediterranean. Perhaps his greatest internal challenge, however, was the Protestant Reformation. Charles, as Holy Roman Emperor, felt a profound duty to uphold Catholic orthodoxy and to suppress what he saw as heresy. He convened diets, debated with Luther, and ultimately declared him an outlaw. He waged war against the Protestant princes of the Schmalkaldic League within Germany, aiming to restore religious unity and imperial authority. His victory at the Battle of Mühlberg in 1547 seemed to offer a moment of triumph, allowing him to enforce his will. But the religious divisions ran too deep and the princes too powerful for a complete victory. The sheer scale of the religious unrest, documented in countless pamphlets and sermons of the era, underscored the difficulty of his task. Beyond Europe, Charles's empire was truly expanding. In the Americas, Spanish conquistadors, acting under his ultimate authority, conquered the vast Aztec Empire and the Inca Empire, Francisco Pizarro in Peru, bringing untold wealth in gold and silver into his treasury. This wealth, while immense, was often immediately consumed by his endless wars and administrative costs, fueling his European ambitions but rarely filling his coffers for long. The establishment of viceroyalties, cities, and vast colonial administrations across the New World was an unprecedented expansion of European power and control, truly making his empire global. Accounts from the Spanish Council of the Indies detail the constant flow of resources and administrative challenges from across the Atlantic. By the 1550s, after decades of relentless effort, constant travel, and ceaseless conflict, Charles V recognized the limits of his grand ambition. The dream of a unified Christian universal monarchy, free of religious division and external threats, proved unattainable. France remained a formidable rival. The Ottomans continued to menace his eastern borders, and Protestantism was firmly entrenched in Germany. The sheer diversity and geographical dispersion of his empire made centralized control incredibly difficult. He was constantly running from one crisis to another. In a move that stunned Europe, Charles V began to abdicate his various crowns in 1555 to 1556, distributing his vast inheritance. His Spanish, Burgundian, and American possessions went to his son Philip II. His Austrian lands and the imperial title went to his brother Ferdinand I. He retired to a monastery in Spain, exhausted by a life dedicated to an ambition that proved too vast for one man. Charles V's global gambit, while never fully realized as a unified, cohesive, universal monarchy, stands as the most ambitious and far-reaching expansion plan in Habsburg history. It brought together a continent-spanning empire and a burgeoning global one under a single ruler, demonstrating a vision of power and unity that would not be seen again until much later periods. It shaped the Ghibeline landscape of the 16th century, defining rivalries and setting the stage for centuries of European history, a testament to the unparalleled scale of his imperial dream